guest today on Veterans Chronicles is Oliver Nickle. He is a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, in which he served 30 years, retiring as a Master Gunnery Sergeant. He's also a veteran of the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Let's begin with where you were born and raised.
I was born outside of Wilmington, Delaware, on my grandparents' farm, and lived there close by until I was 17 years old when I went into the Marine Corps.
At 17 years old, and this was just prior to the Korean War. Did you have a lot of veterans in your family?
Most of them were in World War II, and some of them got called back during the Korean War because they signed up as reservists, really not looking ahead or thinking that they were going to get called back, and it's just the way things went. They got what we always jokingly called the Truman letter.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, they, as they were getting discharged in World War II, they signed them up for reservists for 7 years. And most of them just signed, they were interested in going home and had forgotten all about it until they got the letter to go to active duty for the Korean War.
And having all those family members in the service during World War II, did that, even at a younger age, make you want to serve once you were old enough?
Well, I used to see the people in uniform and was always interested in it. Unbeknownst to a lot of people, we had a division of the Army that was stationed along the Delaware River, and it was a searchlight outfit that used to, all the airplanes used to be focused in on with the lights at night and stuff, and that was a black regiment, and we sort of inherited them in the community, and they were nice people in most cases, and we played baseball with them, football, whatever, as kids, and so that was the ones that I was the closest to, other than my uncles. And when they came back, I had one aunt that served in the WACs.
Why did you join the Marine Corps?
Well, I was going to join the Navy, and I went down to the Navy, and they had a waiting list, and the petty officer there said they need people over there, the Marines. So I talked to the Marine sergeant, and I said it sounded pretty good, and I wound up signing into the Marine Corps. And my parents signed for me unhesitantly at my age. They had to sign for me. And back in that era, the parents unhesitantly signed for their children to go in the military if they needed, because the whole country was defense-oriented, because Russia was starting to act up even in those days, and they were concerned with the country, and they signed for their kids to go in.
Marine Corps basic training is famous for its toughness. What was it like for you?
I thought that it was generally pretty easy, other than the physical training. Being a country boy, we were taught respect for our elders, and it was similar to working with a drill instructor. Yes, sir, no, sir. And, had no problems with following his orders. And I never got in any great trouble in boot camp, other than the physical training was tough on everybody, because most people weren't in the physical condition that they wanted the people to be in at that time.
By the time you completed basic training, is it still 1949? Are we talking early 1950?
1950. I went in January 4th of 1950, and I got out of boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina in April, and went to Quantico.
So just about 2 months later is when the Korean War starts.
The Korean War started, and then I wound up in Korea a year later.
So 1951. And
yeah.
What unit were you in, and where were you sent in?
I was with the 1st Marine Division the whole time, and they were the 5th Marine Regiment and the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. I was a weapons company man, and I was attached to a rifle company. It was Dog Company. It was D Company, Dog at that time, I called it. Then I later moved from dog company to the weapons company and stayed there for the rest of my stay in Korea.
What did that mean that you were the weapons man? What were your duties?
Was anti-tank assault. We had flamethrowers and rocket launchers. We never used the flamethrowers the whole time I was there. And the type of conflict we were in at the time, we weren't attacking pillboxes, and they were designed for World War II for burning people out that they couldn't get out. And rocket launchers, we did use them on enemy bunkers on occasion, but very limited use in them.
So was it a matter of maintenance, of getting them to the front?
Well, we had to maintain them the whole time we was there, and I was attached to a rifle company, and we participated in any activities that the rifle company wanted us to do. We were there to support him, and if it was with the rocket launchers, we did it. If not, we participated as a rifleman with the rifle platoons.
What was your idea of where the war stood at that point? I know a lot of folks think that over the last couple of years there was a lot of fighting, a lot of casualties, but ultimately not a lot changed from where it had been in early 1951. What was your sense of it?
Well, I was in the mountainous region in the eastern part of Korea first, and the snow was so deep there that there wasn't a lot of activity from either side in the wintertime. And patrolling was not that too great. And we had sniper people working on their bunkers and stuff, and we got a lot of mortar fire from the Chinese, and we had the Chinese to our front. And then when spring came, we moved to the Panmunjom area. At that time, the Panmunjom talks were starting, and the activity there was not too much. We were along what they called the MGySgt Valley, and that was a river that came down from North Vietnam and South Vietnam. And I would say the last 6 months in Korea was pretty easy. Didn't worry about too much.
You mentioned the winters. Those have become very famous as well, and telling the story of the Korean War about just how brutal the cold was. What are your memories of that?
I hate snow to this day. I don't care if I never see another flake. It was so cold and so much snow, you just turn against it. A lot of people like to go ski, and I wouldn't even go look at a ski run. That's how much I hate snow.
Were you able to keep warm, or were there just not the clothes to do it there?
Well, if you look at the history of American wars, we were always a little late in developing the equipment that we needed for the particular war. And we didn't have the proper cold weather equipment, and over the months a little bit would come in off and on, and you'd get something new. And the best thing they came in with was the boots, because they kept the cold feet away. And they could fill up with water, and the water would get warm, and they would still be good.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive, especially in those temperatures. So what was your reaction when the war came to a close?
Well, I was back home when it finally finished. In fact, when it finally closed out, I was in Italy. I was stationed. I came back to the United States, and I was back at Quantico, and then I left Quantico and went to Naples, Italy. And I spent a little over 2 years there. And then I went from there to the 3rd Marine Division in Japan. And I was in Okinawa, Japan. And I was there almost 3 years. And I met my wife there. And we've been married 59 years come June 14th it'll be.
Congratulations.
And she's an Alzheimer patient confined to a nursing home now, and the hardest part of married life for me has been that the last 5 years she doesn't know who I am. She always worshiped me. My daughter used to say, "Dad, you're spoiled." And I said, "I love every minute of it." And I don't hesitate to tell anybody that.
It sounds like from what you're saying that you always intended to make this a career. Did you have any doubt after the war what you wanted to do?
Well, after the Korean War, I didn't get out. I stayed right in the service. I never got out because there was not a lot of jobs around in 1953 when the Korean War started. And I had a good job that I liked, and I said, why leave? So I re-enlisted. And then just time went on, years accumulate, and when I married, and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The one, like I said earlier, is a retired Marine colonel, and my daughter works for Unisys Corporation, and then I have one son that works for FDIC in Arlington here.
Mr. Nickle, let's hold right there. When we come back, we'll continue your story here on Veterans Chronicles. We're speaking with U.S. Marine Corps veteran and a veteran of both Korea and Vietnam, Oliver Nickle. This is Veterans Chronicles on the Radio America Network. I'm Greg Columbus. Thanks for being with us. Our guest today is Oliver Nickle, a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, as well as a veteran of both the Korean War and Vietnam. We just learned about his experience in Korea and a little bit following the Korean War in our previous segment. And sir, you mentioned your deployments to Naples and then Okinawa as part of your assignments following the Korean War. What were your assignments there?
Well, after Korea, I went into a unit, and they were looking for somebody to work in the training section, what we called the S3 in the battalion at that time. And I always jokingly said, "That's for me. I came from school in Delaware, and they taught us how to read and write." So I went in as a training NCO, and I never left the 3 shop after that. And wherever I went into the 3, and I worked at a regimental 3 and a division 3 twice in Vietnam. And the highlight of my 3 assignments, I was with the Joint Staff in Hawaii and in the command center, which was J3. And that's when I learned how the government works with the military, because I found out that we didn't do anything unless the State Department or the Defense Department concurred in it or wanted it done. And that was an educational tour to me.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way, because most people, just civilians walking the street, they have no idea what the Defense Department does and really don't care. And the State Department, the same way. And I had an opportunity later to serve as the non-commissioner in charge of the embassy detachment of Marines in Manila, in the Philippines. And I had my family there with me, and we lived out in town, and I had 18 Marines assigned to my detachment to provide security to the American embassy. And so I always considered those as my educational tours on how government works. and most people don't care how the government works. As long as they get their paycheck and they can read the bottom line, they're happy.
As long as they're convinced it's working okay.
That's right.
You were saying during the break that in the early 1960s, the Marine Corps changed the way that it did different ranks and promoted folks along, and that's when you became a gunnery sergeant.
Yes. Well, they changed it in 1958, but
Okay.
I retained my tech sergeant rank until 1960 when I was promoted to gunnery sergeant, which was E7. And then 2 years after that, I was E8, and then 2 or 3 years E9, I forget. I was selected for E9 with 22 years service.
Now, in that role, did you conduct and oversee basic training?
No, I was strictly operations and plans type. I enjoyed that type of work, and I had normally a staff of 10 to 12 enlisted people, and I was the senior one in the shop, and my job was to train them and see that they were doing properly and look out for their welfare as far as if they weren't married, how they were living in the barracks, and that's about all there is to that type of job. I mean, I was involved in everything that happened in the unit.
How did the work ramp up as you got closer to the onset of American involvement in Vietnam?
Well, I was in Hawaii in J3 when Vietnam started. I went to the J3 in Hawaii in 1963 because I had been stationed in Kaneohe, Hawaii, and then I moved across to that assignment, and I was there on a 2-year assignment at Kaneohe, and all of a sudden I got orders to the Joint Staff and wound up 3 years there. That's where I was selected for commission and couldn't pass the physical, and then I left there and went to Camp Pendleton in California and went into the 5th Marine Division. And I went with a battalion of the 5th Marine Division to Japan, Okinawa, Japan, and I was transferred out of there and wound up in the 3rd Marine Division. They had too many ranked people, so I was one that was moved to the 3rd Marine Division.
Is that pretty typical to bounce around among divisions?
Oh, well, the Marine Corps is a small outfit, and they only have, well, right now they got the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Division.
Right.
And they have a division of reserves, the 4th Division, which is headquartered out of New Orleans. And you sort of bounce through all of them. But during Vietnam, I got into the 5th Division because they reformed the 5th Division because it hadn't been activated since the World War II. And they activate and deactivate units all the time, depending on how much money they got and how many people they're allowed to keep.
Fascinating story, and we'll pick it up again after this short break. We're speaking with U.S. Marine Corps veteran Oliver Nickle on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by Oliver Nickle, a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. Joined when he was 17, served in the Korean War, was eventually promoted to gunnery sergeant and then master gunnery sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, and also served in the Vietnam War. Sir, when were you first sent to Vietnam?
1966.
And what was the assignment in particular on that tour?
When I went there, I went as the operations chief of the 3rd Marine Regiment. After about 5 months, I was transferred to the division headquarters in the command center because I had some command center experience in Hawaii, and they're always looking for people to work in command centers. So I went to the command center, and then our operations chief was killed in August of 1967, I guess it was. He was a master gunnery sergeant, and I moved from the operations center up to the operations chief of the 3rd Marine Division at that time. I think it was August when he was killed. A guy by the name of John Berg. John was killed in action, and he was a veteran of 28 years and some months service.
So he was in 3 wars.
Well, he was, yes. Mm-hmm. Him and the division sergeant major was killed by the same rocket that came into the headquarters.
What was it like to know those circumstances and know that you were filling that role?
Your job takes your mind off a lot of things. Was I afraid of Vietnam? Well, you can't afford to be afraid. You just keep doing your job. You're interested in your work. And I wrote my family a letter about every other day, and I would get letters from them, and that was your highlights. My tour in the division headquarters in Vietnam was relatively easy. I was in a place called Dong Ha, and we had a hot meal, 3 meals a day, and I had a shower every evening. It was no problem. And you went to work like a regular job, but they were long days. I mean, weren't 8 hours. They would go early morning and get out of there late at night.
What were the conditions like? Obviously, Korea, it's freezing and mountainous, and then in Vietnam, it's flat and humid.
And very hot, and I loved every bit of it. The hotter the better. I don't mind cold or hot weather at all. Summertime doesn't bother me.
Obviously, the Vietnam War became much more political than Korea did in the homeland here. Did that seep into your conscience at all when you were over there?
You know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I always felt when I went into Vietnam that I was in more of a religious war than I was in economics or any other type of war. And it was because the Catholics and the Buddhists were at one another's throat, though the communists from the north were trying to come in, but they were all Buddhist. And I always call it the political or religious war myself. Maybe you don't want to use that term, but and why was I there? I have no idea to this day, when you really want to get down to it.
So what was your reaction ultimately when the communists took all of Vietnam?
I was in the embassy in Manila at that time, and I inherited the Marine detachment from Saigon. And my unit went from 18 men to 108 overnight because they pulled them out and they dumped them in on me in Manila, and they came in there with practically nothing, and I had to organize them into units, and I was getting orders to where they were to be sent, and I had to clothe them. Of course, money was no problem. I had allowances to buy their civilian clothes because most of them came with nothing. They just, what they were wearing, they got out with it, and that was it.
So what did you do with them all?
I had them sleeping every place I could find a place they could lay down, and was glad to get them out of there as quick as I could because they had no comfort while they were there. In fact, I had some of them took over the teen club, and I had some of them sleeping on top of a pool table. But it was fun in working with them, and they were all good people. The Marines that are attached to our embassies overseas are high quality people. They really picked over very closely to get the assignment. This assignment used to be here in Arlington, or the school used to be here in Arlington at Henderson Hall. And after I left Manila, I came back to the school and was the chief instructor at the school that send the people out to the embassies. And then after I retired, they moved to Quantico and reestablished the outfit, and it's gotten much larger and much more important with the world situation.
Once Saigon fell, how soon were they able to come home? How soon were you able to come home?
Well, they put them on a ship, and they took them into Subic Bay in the Philippines, and then they bussed them over to Manila, where I was at the embassy, and I took them off the bus, and they were sitting on a bleacher off the baseball field there, and I told them, this is going to be your home for a while, and this is what we're going to do for you. We're here to take care of you and get you moving on to your next assignment. And most of them went from there to other embassies. One I felt sorry for because I sent him, he got orders, and I sent him up to Laos. And lo and behold, he was up in Laos a couple of months and got evacuated from there because we give up the embassy there. But most of them went on to fairly good assignments.
So it was just a couple of years after the end of the Vietnam War that you retired, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do then?
I went to work for a company called United Nuclear. They were a company that built reactors for Navy ships, subs, principally subs at that time. And I took a job as the bodyguard for the president of the corporation, because at that time the people in the nuclear business was being demonstrated against, and he was had the company in New York, and he moved it to Falls Church, Virginia, right across from the Marshall High School, if you're familiar with that. And I stayed with him 12 years there. The president that I worked for, he ultimately retired, and the new one moved the headquarters to Annapolis, and I moved to Annapolis with him and built a house on the water over in Kent Island, Maryland.
Nice.
And then my wife got the Alzheimer, and it was too dangerous for her to be around the water. So I came back to Virginia because I had 3 children here at the time.
Was there ever an incident with the protesters and the president?
No, because Fairfax County was prepared to react. They had policemen there, and there's a lot of things involved when you're on private property and demonstrators enter it. I mean, that's trespassing, and it's different than out on the street, you know.
Yes.
So we never had any real problems. We went, in fact, the 2 demonstrations that we had over there were both on Saturdays, and our people wasn't working, the normal people in the office.
Did you go into that job more as a security job, or did you also have an interest in nuclear issues?
Well, I am a pro-nuclear person. I believe in nuclear reactors, and in fact, I like to dilly-dally in the stock market a little bit, and I bought my first stock in a nuclear power plant that was being built up on the Susquehanna River because of my thoughts on nuclear power. And I still believe that to this day, that it's the best we have. And people talk how bad it is and everything, but we have never had a person die in this country as a result of a nuclear power plant. We had the problem up in Harrisburg, I forget the name of the
3 Mile Island.
3 Mile Island, but no one died there, and they were safely removed, and it's working again, the power plant. I don't always look good when I tell people that I'm for nuclear power, but I'm not going to change. I think it's the best thing we have. It has no pollution put out in the air.
That is correct. That is correct. I've just got a few minutes left here, Mr. Nickle. When you look back at your 30 years in the Marine Corps, what do you think of most? What are you most gratified by?
Well, comradeship between the officers and the men in the Marine Corps. There's no other military unit in the world like it. And that's the highlight of the Marine Corps. The way the officers treat their men and the way the men respect their officers. I like my assignment at the J3 and SINCPAC, the highlight of my career, because like I said earlier, give me an opportunity to see how government worked with the military. Mm-hmm. And the average person out in the military doesn't know, nor does the average civilian walk in the streets in this country to know anything about the government unless they work in a particular government unit. And
you mentioned earlier that the Marine Corps is different than the other branches. There's a comradeship that you think is unique there, and also, of course, it's quite a bit smaller than the other branches. But talk about what makes the Corps different in your estimation.
Well, I think from day one it makes a difference. They take you into boot camp like Paris Island I went to, and one of the first things out of the drill instructor's mouth is get them dirty rags you're wearing out, get rid of them, put them in a bag, we're going to send them home. And they strip you right down to nothing. And you go in, the next place is the barber cuts all your hair off. And then the next thing is, after that, you go into the shower, and they issue you a towel and soap, and then you come out the other end of the shower, and they issue you enough uniforms to get by with sneakers. Don't even give you shoes. They give you sneakers and dungarees, and then they start right there and teach you how to wear them. The Marine Corps tears you down so that you're right down at the bottom, and then they build you back up to what they want. You're not allowed to even wear the Marine Corps emblem. I don't know about now, but in those days, until you graduated from basic training. And that's the way they go. And they were very strict on uniform at all times. You know, you had to be in a complete uniform. But that's, and then the camaraderie, like I said, the officers and the men. There's no unit in the U.S. military or any military unit that I know that the officers treat their men like the way the Marine Corps does.
Given the way that it functions so well, after 30 years, was it difficult to go back into the private sector at all?
No, my tour duty at the embassy in Manila, which I wore civilian clothes there all the time, and then I came back to the school as the chief instructor of training the Marines to go out to the embassies. I had a lot of dealings with State Department people, and I took off the suit and I told my son when he retired October 31st, I said, tomorrow it's all over, you know, you hang up the suit. Nobody cares about you anymore. And, you know, it's a lot of people have problems taking off the uniform, but I didn't. I have my dress uniform that I keep, and I have it in my closet, and I put it on. In fact, I'll be putting it on here next month because church service, I always carried a flag for them. And I put it on, I got all my ribbons, badges on it, and my white hat, my white gloves, and away I go.
Fantastic. Last thing before we let you go, you mentioned your son just retired after 30 years of his own in service. What does that legacy of family service mean to you?
Well, at his retirement, he was retired by a major general down at, who was holding the ceremony at the Marine Corps Memorial at Dumfries, Virginia. And he just remarked that this was a family that had 60 years of continuous Marine Corps service. And it made me feel pretty proud sitting there, you know, that here we are, two 30-year veterans. And he went to work with a company called Freeport-McMoran. Mm-hmm. It's a mining company, and ultimately he's going to be assigned to Indonesia, I believe. That's what they hired him on for. But he has a daughter in high school, and there's no high school there for her, so they were going to hold him in Arizona until she gets out of high school. He has two out of school now. One is in George Mason University, and one is in college at Charleston, South Carolina, but she's in college in Barcelona, Spain this semester. Last year she went a semester in Honduras. And I always told my grandchildren that I think one of the most important things for a kid in this country is to learn how to read, write, and speak Spanish. And if you don't, you better start reading the newspaper and see what's going to come of it. And I believe that. And she's already having people, she's in her third year, and she does read, write, and speak Spanish. She's the only one of my grandchildren that really followed what I said, and she does well, and she's got people looking at her right now that need Spanish-speaking employees. She'll be offered a job.
Yeah, there's no shortage of need in that department. Mr. Nickle, thank you for your service to our nation, and thank you for being with us today on Veterans Chronicles.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad I had the opportunity to come here.
Oliver Nickle is a 30-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a veteran of both the Korean War and the Vietnam War. I'm Greg Columbus, reporting for Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Columbus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features. And of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.